Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. This podcast contains general information and is not in any way medical advice. Arguments about nature versus nurture in health, and I suppose other areas, have been raging for a long time. Necessarily, all of us have genetic traits that we've got from our parents because we all have one strand of DNA from our mother and one strand from our father. And maybe I should specify that and saying biological mother and biological father. So in other words, there's a sperm and an egg and the two strands of DNA spliced together, and that's the beginning of the development of a human being. When the human genetic code was decoded in the early 2000s, it was found that something in the order of 99%, I think it was 98.8, I can't quote an exact number, but in that order, of genetics was identical across every single human being on the planet. So there's no there's no racial differences, there's no ethnic differences. This is not probably and shouldn't be that surprising because for the vast majority of people, and yes, there are exceptions, but we've all got two eyes, two legs, two arms, a liver, a heart, a kidney. So the basics of how we're put together is all exactly the same in everybody. And again, some people are born with one kidney, some people are born with, maybe a limb missing. There are genetic anomalies, but most people, we're all the same. Yeah, we have different eye colour. No two people look identical. Even identical twins are not absolutely identical. Some are a lot closer than others. So we're all different, but we share a lot of the same traits. So the question then arises about, well, how much of what happens to us as we go through life is predetermined, so is, in inverted commas, in our genes, nature, and how much is a function of the environment and how we look after ourselves, nurture. Not surprisingly, it's not either or. There are some clearly genetically determined conditions. Haemophilia, which is a condition which causes people to bleed much more commonly, is a genetic condition. Huntington's chorea, fortunately relatively rare condition, has also got a clear genetic tendency, although again not everybody in the family will necessarily get it. But there are a handful of conditions where there is a clear genetic trait and you've either got that gene or you haven't. But a large number of other conditions, this includes a fair number of cancers and also heart disease, have genetic tendencies without a clear genetic lineage. So not everybody in the family is necessarily going to have heart disease if it's in the family. Not everybody in a family where there is a type of cancer is necessarily going to have that cancer. Now, bowel and breast cancer, for example, have a genetic trait. So people in those families may be at slightly higher risk, but it's not a given that they're going to get it. Why is that? Again, number of factors, including how people look after themselves. Now, interesting work that's been done, and again, as always, we'll put the reference link into the description. Researchers have looked at identifying who is most at risk for cardiovascular disease and what interventions are most helpful in modifying that risk. There's a published study in Nature Human Behaviour, looked at polygenic risk scores and lifestyles amongst a Chinese population sample. And the researchers found that high genetic risk coupled with unfavourable lifestyle was strongly associated with early onset cardiovascular disease. Well, that's probably not a great surprise. If it's already perhaps a genetic tendency and you do a whole lot of actions and take steps in your life that increase your risk, then it's probably not a great surprise that it's more likely to occur. For example, if you're driving on the road and you're not wearing a seatbelt and you speed and you drive on the wrong side of the road, it's probably increasing significantly at each additional step, your chances of coming unstuck. Lifestyle interventions can reduce genetic risk 14-fold. Researchers found that the high genetic risk group had a 14.7-fold risk reduction in incidences of early onset coronary artery disease and a 2.5-fold risk reduction in early onset ischemic stroke and a 2.6-fold decrease in late onset coronary artery disease when changing to a favourable lifestyle from an unfavourable one. So 14-fold decrease is a very, very, very big change. Even 2.5-fold is reasonable. It's a reasonably big difference. And what are they talking about here? And not rocket science. Not smoking, doing some regular exercise, not being significantly overweight, eating a relatively healthy diet. So if we look at what are the risk factors for heart disease, it is cigarette smoking, high blood pressure, high blood sugar or diabetes, and cholesterol. It's the fourth. People are often led to believe that it's the biggest risk factor. It is not the biggest risk factor. It is a risk factor, but not the biggest one. And then, yes, family history is in amongst that, and there's some minor risk factors as well. But regular exercise, managing your stress, and that helps to control blood pressure, not smoking, and being on a relatively healthy diet, and by that it means not having too much sugar, not too much fake food, not too much processed food, can reduce the genetic tendency by 14-fold. So what does that do for people who might not be at genetic risk? Well, we don't actually know, but you got to think it's going to be fairly comparable. So if you are in a situation where heart disease is in your family, and yes, you may be at some slightly statistical increased risk because of that, and it's worth pointing out that a lot of people, a large number of people, because heart disease is so prevalent, and I'm in this boat as well. My late father died of heart disease, have got some genetic traits, but it is what we make with what we start with. And the concept of epigenetics, which I was first introduced to nearly a decade ago now, I suspect it's been around for longer, is the idea that, yes, we all have certain genes, but they may be switched on and off, a little bit like a light switch. And there is a view that epigenetics is the expression of those genes. So if we do have genes variably that might contribute towards heart disease or, in different circumstances, cancer, then if those genes are switched off, we haven't got any, we're not going to develop that condition at that time. If they're switched on, then we might do. What tends to switch them on? It's going to be lifestyle and environmental factors. So there's really good news in this, that we don't have to have a deterministic approach and say, well, look, this is what happened to my father or my brother or my uncle. Look, that's just going to happen to me and there's nothing I can do about it. There are no absolute force fields. It's not saying that if we eat sensibly, if we do regular exercise, if we manage our stress, we don't smoke, that we can never get any sort of illness, that it is impossible for us ever to have problems with our heart. It's never impossible. But we can reduce the likelihoods. In much the same way, if we walk on the footpath or the sidewalk, it's not impossible that a car leaves the road and hits us. It can happen, but it's not likely to happen. Or much less likely to happen if we walk in the middle of a freeway. If we walk in the middle of a freeway, maybe the cars will go around us. They might do their best. But we know where our chances of getting hit are greater and where they're less. So it's about modifying or reducing risk rather than absolutes. And when the steps that we can take are relatively simple, and those simple steps are, and I'm repeating myself, but I think it's important, some regular exercise, eating sensibly, so eating real food as against a lot of sugary processed food, so throw away the boxes with elephant stamps on them. Not smoking, and again, we've spoken previously about how helping people stop smoking is a good way to go. Unfortunately, the Australian government doesn't want to do that, but if you want to listen to previous podcasts about vaping, please check them out. And, as best we can, managing our stress. And just the last one on that is looking to get enough sleep, and prioritising sleep is also beneficial. Ultimately, we can influence what goes on in our lives. We're not just floating in the breeze. We can influence how our health is. We can influence what direction it goes in life, and that power is in our hands to shape and influence, not absolute. Again, I emphasise, no force fields, no guarantees, but very, very, very strong capacity to influence and make certain outcomes, including better health and living better for longer, far more likely. Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like, and share. You can also follow it on all the socials. There'll be new content uploaded each week.